Weekly recap, part one, the week 12/4 to 12/8. This was a very productive and pretty busy week because there were conferences. It's the last week of lectures at Stanford, or most of the seminars are finished, and I'm also preparing for NeurIPS. So for me, I guess this is going to be it for 2023 as far as my visits to Stanford are concerned. I'm going to continue next year, but anyway, this week I want to start the review with the Q2B conference. So it's a quantum computing business conference that I attended at Santa Clara, and I want to throw in also Professor Choi from Stanford, who wasn't at the conference but gave a seminar about using Rydberg atoms for quantum computing, which is part of his research. So I'll combine those. I think my main impression is that the field is still in sort of exploratory phase, in other words, we still are quite far away from tangibility, but there's interesting research, and it's one of those fields where I just want to keep my finger on the pulse. I think there is definitely the Rydberg atom situation is very interesting because they achieve very long coherence times, and actually there was an application in quantum sensing from L3 Harris that also discussed that same approach. So I believe that this particular idea, also discussed by Professor Kaufman in one of the physics seminars this year that I attended, and also Vladan Vuletic from MIT, who's big on this. So there's a lot of interesting talk, and I think the interest coalesces around that. So that's one of the interesting things about this field, that you're kind of able to dissect a little bit what's hot, what's interesting, and then of course also try to dissect the hype from what's real. But in general, I think the field, again, it's to quote Chad Rigetti, who was at the conference, he said we're not even in the first inning. William Zhang, he said, another person that I follow in the space, he said that we're definitely past the first inning here, because there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of investment, maybe not volume wise, like 2 billion a year is not that much compared to what's going on in AI, but it's still money, and people are interested. And then we have the whole quantum crypto scene. So there is enough interest to talk about the field. I don't necessarily want to get boggled down in the question, okay, which are we now at? Is this a renaissance? Is this beginning to be interesting, or maybe not, and all that? I just want to stay with my feet on the ground. Okay, this is what I see. This is where it's going, and those are the interesting fields to look at. Also, don't forget, we here at Orange Capital Partners, we're in the business of generating wealth. So we're not researchers. We're not paid to teach people, nor are we paid to publish papers or anything like that. It's our job to generate wealth. So let's keep that also in mind. This is not in wrong podcast. It's December 8th, 2023. This is Krim Delko. For the day, the fund is up 3.5%. The market's up 40 basis points. For the year, we're up 114.4%. The market is up 20.2%. We're outperforming by 94.2%. So my first, the part one of this week's recap is about the quantum computing conference in Santa Clara, and also Professor Choi's seminar. So I'm just going to talk about quantum in general in this episode. And let's start with Chad Rigetti and William Zhang. So these are two figures that I follow in the space. Rigetti started Rigetti Computing. William Zhang was an employee there, his PhD, I believe, from Cambridge. His focus is on more theoretical comp-sci, math, and on the software side of things. I don't quite remember the conversation I had with him. It was probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, something like that. Quite a long time. But I remember that his interest is definitely in the theory of things, so computation, and how the reality and quantum computing merge. So it's kind of David Deutschian in that sense. And if he's from Cambridge, it's not a surprise that people who are influenced by that kind of thought are also, I mean, they come from that part of the world. So they were, I would say, well, my first impression is that I think Chad Rigetti has kind of dropped the ball a bit. So he's an entrepreneur. He started Rigetti Computing. It's a it's a quantum computing company based in superconducting technology. The company is public now. It's not doing very well. The stock is, it's a penny stock. I didn't like the idea of Rigetti going public. They went public with a SPAC. I have my opinions about SPACs. This is not the topic here. So I think Chad Rigetti has kind of dropped the ball. He now works for a VC in the Netherlands, investing in quantum computing. It's disappointing to see a talent like that being sort of going into the VC space. Again, there's a whole episode I can make just about that, so I don't want to discuss this. Anyway, that was sort of my impression. He's a little bit, like he said, we're not even in the first inning, so there's a little bit of like tiredness. It's time. I'm sure he went through a lot of board meetings. A lot of people asked him the question, when, and the answer is not yet, not yet, not yet, and people get tired. Will Zheng is different. I think he's younger. He has less skin in the game. He seems more like, he worked for Goldman. He's now a VC, so he seems to enjoy the situation that he's in, which is he's the expert in a field that everybody cares about, and he's able to make himself a nice life with that. I think that's my impression. Whatever it is what it is. Not much tangible content from the interview. I think the moderator also was relatively weak, didn't ask interesting questions. So it just didn't go very far, but it's okay for people who are newer in the space. The interview probably gave some motivation. I would say, look, if somebody asks me where's the quantum computing space, I'd say, look, it's interesting. I told my son, listen, I mean, he's just about to go to college in 2 years. This is an interesting field. You should study it. Study quantum physics, study computation, study math. Maybe you can find a Venn diagram there that fits, and then, in 5-6 years, who knows? Actually, there was a company presenting, and why don't I switch to that part of the conference, Phasecraft, very interesting company out of the UK. And what they were talking about in a nutshell is the following. They said, look, the qubits are not there, but maybe we can improve the algorithms so we can sort of narrow that gap between the amount of qubits that are needed to do something useful, in this particular case was quantum chemistry, and the algorithms. Because what we have now, it's kind of a moving target, right? You have let's say you have algorithms that might work if we had quantum computers, and then we have the quantum computers themselves, right? So you can say, okay, given this algorithm, we need this many qubits to make something work. But how about we improve the algorithms? This is what Phasecraft is doing, and I thought that was interesting. Now, I don't know the details of how they do it. There's some interesting mathematical ideas here. By the way, this is very, very similar to what is happening in machine learning. Let's say generative AI, particularly image generation of AI, they had similar problems where they in sort of the probabilistic graphical representation space, which is kind of what the fusion models are and all these things. There, the problem was that it was hard to find mathematical representations of where, like if you give a model a certain amount of data, it is supposed to predict a distribution of where that data comes from. In other words, it is supposed to reproduce a picture from given input or a text from given input. And there was a mathematical problem, how to normalize that, how to make this sort of probabilistically robust. And that problem was solved with a sort of a shortcut, which was called a scoring function. And so there are ways in mathematics and statistics to find shortcuts to solve a problem that maybe is not as elegant as a nice, beautiful closed-end solution, but it works. So in a sense, I think that's what this field also is that's what this field, or that's what Phasecraft is trying to do. Again, I don't know the details, but that's my impression that this is where the research is going. Now, let's talk about Professor Choi's Rydberg atoms. I think that was probably the most interesting presentation next to the L3 Harris presentation, which is related. Rydberg atoms, I've come across these things now a couple of times during my sabbatical. Professor Kaufman spoke about this. Professor Vuletich spoke about this, and Choi also spoke about this before. So the idea is that you have a certain setup where you excite atoms, specific atoms, there's certain materials that you use for that, very specific atoms, and you excite them in a way so you move a certain, I believe, probably the valence electrons, I'm not quite sure, but you move some electron far away from the nucleus into a different energy space. And by doing that, you're creating a situation where that atom now becomes a qubit. And why is that so? Well, because you can move that electron in sort of Hilbert space, time, many situations. So that is the case is the ground state and this excited state. And there's, Hilbert space number of potential situations, and that can be your, the information that you encode. And the advantage of the Rydberg atom is that it has a very long coherence time. Long coherence times mean that you can work with this. You can create gates that can actually exploit superposition and entanglement, which are the two properties you're trying to exploit when you talk about quantum computing. So Professor Choi was talking about this. He was talking about the difficulties. He was talking about the potential, the opportunities. Fundamentally, I think what the Rydberg atom offers here is a way to produce hardware that allows the exploitation of quantum mechanics, in particular superposition and entanglement. Choi himself is also using Rydberg atoms to create entanglement, study the information content of entanglement. So there's a lot of things that go with this, which in my opinion are all partly research interests, but also interesting in terms of exploiting the possibility of quantum computing for practical applications. So let's take, for example, machine learning. Let's take stable diffusion, for example. So one of the applications of quantum computing in diffusion could be the randomness of noise that you have. So randomness itself can be created truly with a quantum computer, not so truly with a classical computer. Now, maybe that's not the most important thing, but this would be one application. Now, if you take a quantum computer and you think about what it actually is, quantum computer is the idea of a quantum computer is to prepare states in terms of, let's say, the Rydberg atoms. So you prepare states, and then you evolve those states, and you get to a certain result, and then you measure that result. So in that sense, it's very similar to a classical computer. The advantage is that you can prepare many states with qubits. So for example, if I ask you to represent how many states can I have with 8 coin flips? Okay, you have 256 states that you need the potential. So you have 256 states that can be represented with 8 coin flips. In a quantum computer, you need 8 qubits to represent 8 coin flips. So the quantum computer scales with n, the amount of coin flips you're looking for. And over there in the classical system, it scales a lot faster. So that's a nice illustration of how you could model a problem in quantum computing and then get to the result. Now, again, I'm not an expert in computation, but I can feel the advantage, and I understand the problem. And I think for us here at Orange County Partners, that's good enough for now. Okay, we don't need a PhD in quantum physics to understand the problem. The problem is representation of problems that can be accelerated, and also the solution can be, you can find the solution much faster. We can also see lots of applications in, particularly in AI. So therefore, the quantum computing space we consider it an interesting and important space. And I think Professor Choi's presentation was inspiring in that sense. He's not the most interesting person, I would say. There's a bit of a culture and language barrier and all of that, but still, I think the field is interesting. Rydberg atoms are interesting, and they're interesting also for quantum sensing, which is the next presentation I want to talk about. It's L3 Harris. They spoke about RF receiver based on Rydberg atoms, in other words, a quantum RF receiver. And now that I kind of understand the situation there, which is that when you create a Rydberg atom, you create a very large dipole. What that means is there's a large energy spectrum between the ground state and the excited state. And because it's so large, you can then detect very fine-grained, precise, and RF signals on a very wide spectrum. In other words, you can create a receiver that is so sensitive that it can receive signals that are very low frequency, so very low energy, very far, and things along those lines. So you're in the middle of the desert, you're in the middle of the Amazon jungle, you have an operations team that needs to receive signals. You can receive them. You don't need an antenna. It's very low weight, low frequency, low energy, low everything, and you can still communicate. So I can see why L3 Harris, which is sort of an army supplier, is excited about that. And I think to me that was really probably the first time I saw a real application that really makes sense to me. There were other presentations. Let's say Airbus was talking about how they can use quantum gravity, sort of quantum sensors for gravity measurements, for optimal loading optimizations. Like, yeah, those are. It feels like those are constructed problems. But this L3 Harris situation to me looked like the real thing, like something that you really want to have, and if the cost works out, which is the question here, of course, what's the cost of a system like that, then I think that was really interesting. I also thought that the people who presented were very interesting because they were engineers, PhDs, so you can see kind of where that path leads you. If you get a PhD in physics and you work on quantum mechanics and quantum computing and quantum sensing, you can end up supplying communications technology to the private sector, to the government, and I think that's a positive. That's a good thing. The last thing I want to mention is a conversation I had with IonQ. Now, IonQ is an interesting case study because it's a public company. It's a company that's doing okay, so this is not like Rigetti. They have a technology which has been around for a while. They're a spin out from the University of Maryland, which is a quantum computing powerhouse, quantum physics powerhouse. And it's interesting to see how a company like that has the ability to navigate the private sector, to actually generate some real revenue. The market cap is around $2.5 billion, so we're not talking hundreds of billions here, but it's still something. And I spoke with two representatives. One was a salesperson, the other one was a research scientist. The salesperson was telling me that their clients are interested, so there is interest. I would characterize the interest in quantum computing as sort of a Fomo type interest. I just don't want a fear of missing out. I want to be in the game. IBM's making a lot of noise. Google's making a lot of noise, so I want to be there too, that kind of thing. I personally think it's a good thing to do that. It's not very expensive. People can build careers on these things. And if it works out, it works out. Look at neural nets, right? Jeff Hinton, Banjo, and LeCun were sort of dark horses, or I don't know if that's the right metaphor. They were unknown in ComSci. They weren't famous. They weren't the Bill Gates or the John Hennessy or any of that stuff of the world. And then, lo and behold, it became incredibly powerful. So I think the same will happen to quantum computing. I have a sense that quantum computing will actually eventually go somewhere to, let's say, something like an ImageNet competition or something along those lines and win, and then people will jump on it. I think that's what's going to happen. It's not happening right now. And I think IonQ it's one of those like hang in there type of situations. Now, in particular, what they do is what's called ion traps, which apparently have a problem, which is that they can't scale up. I don't understand the details of why they can't scale up, but that's the problem. The advantages of the ion traps are relatively robust. They have long coherence time, so you can actually work with them, and you can also manipulate them directly with optical lasers instead of using microwaves, which the salesperson told me is a good thing. Now, the research scientist I spoke with, he gave me a little bit of a he was trying to explain to me how quantum computing could solve the memory wall in machine learning. So we were talking about this, which I thought was interesting. That's another, just how should I say? It's a nice way to think about this problem. Okay, what's the problem in AI? It's the memory wall. The memory wall, which is the problem that you have to move memory in and out of the logic unit in order to update weights. I spoke about this last week. Thierry Tambo's presentation was all about that, and he's trying to solve that in the classical world. Quantum computers could potentially solve that in the quantum world, and this is one of those things that maybe somebody can develop a quantum computer just to solve a very real ML problem, and then proliferate themselves into the world of Silicon Valley and also NeurIPS. And I don't see the connection here. Here's what's interesting. I don't see the connection between NeurIPS and the quantum world. And I'm curious why that is, because there should be, but there isn't. I think that's an opportunity, and I expect in the future to see that chasm being crossed, and that's what's going to proliferate quantum computing into the world where we have hundreds of billions of investment and not just a few billion. So to summarize, quantum computing and business, the conference Silicon Valley this week, it's part one of my events discussion this week. I had conversations with IonQ, I had conversations with Phasecraft, I met Chad Rigetti, Will Zhang, and I listened to a presentation by by Professor Choi about Rydberg atoms. Now, my conclusion is that the quantum space is still not there, but people are working on it. Rydberg atoms are interesting for compute and for sensing. And I think the most interesting thing about quantum computing is that the chasm between quantum computing and machine learning hasn't been crossed yet. The applications to me are obvious. You can apply it. There's lots of interesting problems you can solve with quantum computing, in particular the memory wall. And to me, this is going to happen sooner or later, and that's when quantum computing will be proliferated into a much higher sphere. Thank you.